Spongebob has stood the test of time and has been on the air and releasing episodes for more than 24 years. Since its release in 1999, Spongebob has built a massive fanbase and community of people who love the series, and that's in no short thanks to all of the great characters in the show. However, there is one character who always has fans stopping and thinking about where they even came from, and honestly, after looking into this fan theory, it's heartbreaking to think about Pearl's devastating origin, but it certainly explains why Mr. Krabs has always been so protective of her. It's no secret that there has been a lot of confusion surrounding the idea that Mr. Krabs somehow fathered a whale, and because the show has never revealed how that could even happen, it's been left up to the fans to figure out who Pearl's mother was and what happened to her. As it stands, over the course of 277 episodes and 4 films, Pearl's mom has not made a single appearance on screen. And on top of that, very little has ever been spoken about her by Mr. Krabs or his daughter. The only thing that is clear is that she has not been a part of their lives. Whether that was for an explainable reason or for something much darker, it's hard to say. It honestly depends on the school of thought that you follow when it comes to Pearl's origin and how Mr. Krabs became her father in the first place. Because realistically, there are 2 theories that are fairly different but with the same end result. Granted, one theory is much darker and presents a solid reason behind Mr. Krabs being so protective of his precious daughter. When it comes to the first and arguably more interesting but far darker theory is that Mr. Krabs took Pearl in and adopted her after a horrible tragedy befell the whale's mother, which inevitably led to her death. Which is truly a sad theory, but one that could actually hold a bit of weight after taking a look at some of the themes and events in the franchise that support it. The second theory, on the other hand, considers the very strange idea that a crab ended up marrying a whale and they did the nautical nasty together and had a child. And while that would be biologically impossible, the Bikini Bottom is also a place where fire can survive underwater, so you have to consider that anything can be possible. Now, despite that theory actually having a bit of evidence that could help support it, there's just something off-putting about a crab having a whale as his biological daughter. But no matter which one is proven to be true, the end result is all the same no matter how you look at it. Pearl's mother was not around as she grew up, and the reason behind it is likely why Mr. Krabs is so protective of her. Now, the idea that Mr. Krabs adopted Pearl has always been the concept that makes the most sense to most people, but when you hear why some fans think he would have chosen to adopt her in the first place, your heart might break. The first thing that's important to understand for this theory to make sense is how Eugene Krabs works when it comes to his emotions. If you were to ask anyone, what's the first word that you'd use to describe Mr. Krabs, 9 times out of 10 they would say greedy or cheap, but surprisingly enough, some viewers seem to forget about his ability to love. There are multiple times throughout the Spongebob series that Mr. Krabs is shown to have a huge heart when it comes to love, especially in the episode Krusty Love, which involved him falling head over heels for Mrs. Puff. In that episode, Mr. Krabs showed that he was willing to put someone he loved ahead of his lust for money as he continued to buy Mrs. Puff expensive gifts that she didn't even ask for. And because of his capacity to love and to actually put his obsession with money to the side when it came to someone important, it's understandable that he would be willing to take in a child in need even though it would come at an expense to him. Now, the key phrase in that last sentence was child in need, because according to this theory, that's exactly what Pearl was following the gruesome death of her mother, and when Mr. Krabs saw that, he knew he had to protect the baby whale for the rest of his life. There's actually a really well illustrated gaff comic about the theory that shows just how tragic the circumstances that Eugene found Pearl in. You see, it's believed by those who support the theory that Pearl's mother was killed by whalers, and Mr. Krabs found the poor baby whale lying on the bottom of the ocean alongside her mother's body. And as the series has shown viewers, Mr. Krabs may be greedy, but he isn't a monster. So according to this theory, he did not hesitate when it came to taking care of his precious new baby girl. And on that day, Mr. Krabs decided to name her Pearl as she instantly became the most precious thing in his life and likely the only thing that he would cherish more than an actual precious gem. Just in case you're unsure that Eugene is obsessed with pearls, it should be noted that the restaurant owner went on a clam hunt to celebrate his millionth dollar specifically to look for pearls. On top of that, the sign for the Krusty Krab was made out of a massive clam shell, which after thinking about his love for hunting clams is now looking like a massive hunting trophy rather than a restaurant sign. But either way, it shows that pearls hold a special place in Mr. Krabs' heart, and according to this theory, the whale that he took in after her mother was tragically murdered surely became his most precious pearl of all, which is why he seems so protective of her in the show. Another interesting detail that fans have started to equate with this theory is actually the intense yet justified fear of hooks that Mr. Krabs has. In what might be one of the most memorable episodes of the series titled Hooky, Mr. Krabs warned Spongebob and Patrick about the dangers of going near fishing hooks despite the allure of the tasty bait sitting on them. While it might seem like Eugene's fear of fish hooks is just him being an experienced crustacean who has been smart enough not to get himself captured, some think that his fear might come from trauma that he experienced when he first found Pearl. while it's likely that Pearl didn't even remember what had happened to her mother by the time she was old enough to understand the world around her, Mr. Krabs definitely would. That means if this theory were to be true, the crustacean would likely have a vivid image permanently burned into his brain of what he saw that day, which in this case was a whale carcass full of hooks and harpoons. So while Mr. Krabs would spend most of his time being overprotective of Pearl, when the hooks came down, he couldn't help but become protective of everyone because he would have known the real damage that humans can inflict with a couple of hooks and spears. Actually, the same argument could be made for when he became a cyborg in the movie Spongebob Squarepants, Sponge Out of Water. During the film, Spongebob and his friends lost the Krabby Patty secret formula to a human pirate who took the formula to shore. After a bunch of strange events, including some time traveling, an intergalactic wizard dolphin, overseer of the galaxy, gave them the ability to breathe on land. And while the group tried to retrieve that coveted Krabby Patty formula, Spongebob and his friends all received superpowers, including Mr. Krabs. Interestingly enough though, Eugene's powers seem to simply turn him into a cyborg, but when you think about this theory, that's actually perfect. Because as mentioned before, after finding Pearl and her mother after the whalers had gotten to them, Mr. Krabs grew terrified of humans, especially of their hooks and harpoons that they used to kill. So in order to combat those while on land and to ensure that he remains safe, the crustacean has made sure that his shell is truly armored. And honestly, this would be a really cool detail if it didn't have these dark undertones, as it ties in with the theory that Mr. Krabs found Pearl hiding under the body of her dead mother. Now, if you found this theory to be a bit too dark, there is another idea floating around that suggests that Pearl's mother was actually Mrs. Krabs. Only there is a bit of a twist. You see, according to this theory, Mr. Krabs fell in love with a whale who ended up becoming Mrs. Krabs. The two of them had a child together before, but sadly, Mrs. Krabs either left or passed away. It's clear from the series that Mr. Krabs isn't only interested in crustaceans when it comes to romance, as shown in the Krusty Love episode when he fell in love with a pufferfish. So it's definitely plausible that Mr. Krabs could have fallen in love with a whale. As for the biological logistics of their offspring, again, you have to remember that a lot of unrealistic things happen in the Bikini Bottom. And on top of that, there is actually a bit of evidence that supports the idea that Pearl's mother was Mrs. Krabs, though this evidence didn't come from the show or one of the movies. Instead, you need the Spongebob Squarepants trivia book, which is the only place that has ever confirmed that Pearl's mother was in fact Mrs. Krabs, and according to the book, she was a whale just like her daughter, as it describes Pearl by saying she took after her mother. Beyond that though, the show and the creators have been very scarce about the details surrounding Pearl's mother. The only response that Steven Hillenburg gave when he was asked why he made Pearl a whale was that he wanted each member of the main cast to be a different animal. And as far as Mrs. Krabs appearing in the show, Hillenburg was also very vocal about not wanting that to ever happen. But what do you think? Was Pearl adopted by Mr. Krabs after her mother was tragically killed by whalers, or is that too dark for SpongeBob? And do you prefer to think that Mr. Krabs just had a daughter with a whale? Make sure to let us know in the comments below.